Okay, so what you're going to hear today is about urban villages and open buildings. Why? Because we have a society, we've heard already, way too regulated. In fact, planning has been a disaster. The idea of regional planning, the idea of urban design and architecture are divisions that are kind of categories that are no longer useful anymore. We don't even know what kind of a city we're in. We have no words to describe what's happening in cities. If you go to Lagos, if you go to Mumbai, if you go to Caracas, to Sao Paulo, things are happening that there's no description. At least politicians understand it. So we need to figure out how we can do interdisciplinary thinking. But to make all of that easy, we talk about this open village. So what we did in a long time ago, my partner and I, Hubert Klumner, we went around the city finding out communities and leaders in the community. And why? And we did that in Caracas, where I'm originally from. Now I live in different places, but and teach at ETH in Zurich. But there's a political equator that divides, obviously, and this is just a fictitious line, that divides mindsets. There's a very different mindset in the South. The South is my North. And the South, why is it interesting? As you heard today, that most of the world population in the next 30 years will grow in the South. And where will it grow? In slums. This is a pixelated map that's actually part of a real larger map that will show that now we're living with 33% of the world in population in poverty. And that's only going to increase. So we think we're in the last round, ecology. You heard earlier this morning that there's only 15 years before this is irreversible. Of course, you know that from climate change. But what about explosion, political and social explosion? There's more small conflicts in the world than ever before. So it's time to redefine our sense of urbanization, right? This is typical of Caracas. These are the slums, interspersed slums all around, coming in and out of the city. They're embedded pocket ones, and you have the formal city. It's obviously a kind of mishmash. The interesting thing maybe about the photo is that the glue is the informal city, the glue that holds everything together. Well, we think that's a great laboratory, right? Perfect for innovation. So we went from ETH, and our office is here with some urban agriculture on the roof. We eat there with barbecues. We've created our own hall. We've created a school within a school that's not a school, that doesn't want to be like a school, but it actually hierarchies are broken down. And we invite everyone to collaborate across departments, right? To look at what we call this kind of social design. If you want, it's not a good word, but it's basically youth-based design in either health or sports, of course, housing. And one of the good laboratories that we used was this building, 45-floor squatted building in downtown Caracas called Torre David. Now, it's squatted with 3,500 people. What they did is they took an office building that was left standing in the revolution. We're currently in a revolution, those who don't know, 18 years we've been in it, right? And this kind of structure is the hardware. The software were the people occupying it, building it out, connecting up. Now you think it's a slum. It's not a slum at all. It's actually in the middle of the city. It's well connected to subways. They put all the infrastructure in, and they built out their own apartments in an office building. So those who thought that Torre David was a slum, it was wrong. It may look unfinished, right? So what's happening? This is the cover of Le Corbusier's book called Vers une architecture, towards a new architecture. But he actually wanted to call it Architecture Revolution, because he said either we start to do social housing, which he was thinking about, the Maison Domino, or we're going to get revolution. And that's what happened in my country. People were not provided for housing, adequate housing in the city. So people built it themselves all around the city. And that's happening in Indian Africa, right? So architecture spatializes and materializes this kind of development. We architects are complicit in the process. We've accepted it. We haven't done anything against it. However, that wasn't the story at the beginning of the century when modern architecture really took on these social ideals, right? Or the Renaissance for that mode. Something went wrong between the Renaissance and maybe the beginning of the 20th century. So city, what is city? City is the people. So this is an interesting map. Think about, let's build an open city, which would be, let's create a block, an open structure where we only put the passages in, we put the stairwells for fire and safety, elevators, and we leave in this little gridded zone. We define what the public space is, and then we leave all the rest open. And then we occupy it. Let's have an open building. Let's invent one where there's some process of cooperative process where you can sign up, where you can decide, It can't be done. I tell you, it has been done in Caracas. So what I found interesting in the Netherlands is here's a group of neighbors. They call it G250, right? It's very funny, riffing off the global 50 and the global G7s and stuff, where the 250 neighbors of one block get together to see where their politicians are spending their money. That's what we should do. The city has to be taken over by the people. Politicians are not attending. These are my first clients. They were extensions of my nanny, of the cook, of the gardener, and we went into the slums and we created, sports events, and actually, to tell you the truth, these three guys are no longer alive. So when that started to happen to us, we said this is a human rights issue, right? Who has the right to come to the city? Just because you don't have the money, you're not allowed to come to the city? That's not right. When the cities where work and internets and connectivity is? No, it's a human rights issue, and people should be penalized for that. And the right to infrastructure, the right to appropriate housing. So let's look at South Africa. There's 7.5 million who live in 2,700 informal settlements, 2.5 million housing shortage. So of course people come to Cape Town. It was apartheid. They were not allowed to live in the center. So they created these housing. So we're looking at one little one, and we're going to try a pilot project. This is Pumezo. This is his house. He's volunteered. We're doing it off the grid, illegal. The government kind of looks the other way because they have no solution. They know we're doing it, but they have no legislation to let me do it because the land is public, would have to go through 40,000 approvals, right? So we're building new houses. We're verticalizing, we're putting density, we're opening a shop for him on the ground floor and pushing him up, not moving him, not bulldozing it. And that we're going to do with 100 houses. We reorganize them, we shift them and we create courtyards, and we just slightly negotiate. Now that process is an imperfect one. This is not looking permanent, right? It will be permanent, but the process is a game. You work with them, you decide who wants to go where, who wants to have what, right? So that's one of the projects. But you guys might know me for the Metro Cable, where we took one of those informal settlements on the hill, 40,000 people, and we connected them to the city, not with a road, but with a cable car. So the government wanted to build roads, and we said, forget roads. Urbanism and planning should be much more flexible today. Cable cars. So Doppelmayr, a European company, right, said, we've done enough ski slopes, they're just maintaining the ones that are built, right? We opened a whole new division for them, for doing these cable cars. It's the first time a cable car has been done in the city as a loop, connects this hillside with the formal city and the subway. And here you see us doing, but that wasn't a client that called me. My partner's Austrian. He grew up with skis, with cable cars, right? And there actually is a cable car in Caracas that was used for touristic purposes. We just put two and two together. And there you see 5 stations. And now we plugged in social infrastructure to the sides of the stations, made gymnasiums that are actually people getting married here. They're community centers, music schools, and actually autistic children's schools. And so these are all products that were not asked for, but actually came to us as an idea because there was no place for the autistic child of a friend of mine. So we lobbied with the city we got the worst property in the city, and it was so small, and you can't build an autistic children's school with going vertical. So we made the whole building a ramp, like the Guggenheim. Kids go up, and as they circulate, they look out at the trees, they look into their classrooms, all glass in the middle, and they know where they're going. So you've got design innovation. So this open building I've been talking about, what's it about? This is a prototype, is that you would connect the street and the street would go through the building. There'd be all kinds of workshops so that clusters, neighborhoods would be in vertical, like clusters. They'd come out to public squares. And actually, you could build that building in a process over time. And here it is going up with the Anglican Church. And actually, this was the Anglican Church house. And we built it over the house to see if we could build it over slums and in slums and around slums, right? And here you see that building inserted in the city. But what we want is the street to connect over. And you'll see that in a second. So open city. So to get back to Europe, Athens is burning. You know that. It's now, stock market's crashing today. You probably saw because they're scared that Athens is going to fall out. Actually, I tell you, Athens is going into a very interesting experiment. In fact, I'm all for experimentation. The world's not too good, right? So we might as well try different things, right? So what we did was we created a whole lobby group. We called it Reactivate Athens, and we wanted to come up with 100 sourced ideas. We used the internet, we used newspaper, we had lobby groups coming, and so we're now coming out with the 100 ideas for the mayor of Athens, the potential. So grab any abandoned site, right, parking lot, and create a little urban theater, right? They're famous for theaters, right? Train station, that's not an appropriate train station for Athens. Come on, with 3 tracks, get a real train station. But don't fill it with shops like Starbucks. No, make a university inside, like a community college, right? As you come on another level, there would be a university on the top of the train station, right? Another vacant lot for the theater, yes, you see more. Or this parking lot, why don't we turn it into a structure that over time can be incorporated, and you could have shops, or you can have housing, or you can have startup companies. And the point is, we need a legislation that allows this to change over time. No longer land planning uses that says residence, zonings, this, that. We have to think in 3 dimensions. We have to think over time periods. Right? So parking garages seem really good because they're the cheapest structure. You can conform it to any. So we said, let's go around the world looking. And we found some. This is a parking garage that was transformed into offices already. And then we want the village in the city. Let's not get rid of this idea of village. But of course, since the early 20th century, Stalin hated the city. So he wanted to move people to the suburbs. Le Corbusier hated the city. So he made these Plattenbau blocks, right? Saying the garden, the tower in the park idea, which you guys know from the suburbs, right? Out there, right? That's no good. Bring people into the city, have villages. Let's replace it if we need it, or let's substitute it for a kind of vertical parking garage, like a ramp, so you can go up with your bicycle. You don't need cars anymore. And then you populate these open structures, and you can play a game. People can decide where they go. They buy 1 parking lot and 2 parking garages. They can use it to park their car, or they can use it for something else. So here's a little animation of that, how it would be. Or here's one that we're going to build now in China for the Shenzhen Biennale. And to sum up, so diagnose topography, visualize social factors, diagnose morphology, reverse engineer the city, right? What you have is not what you want, so let's see what else we need to do with it, add infrastructure. And the question is not whether cities are sustainable or whether these gigantic service-deprived areas are sustainable. No, what's not sustainable is 33% of the world in poverty. So the way Karl Popper says, let's go and focus on the real issues, and if we put all of our brains together, we'll solve it. Oh, yes, one last project. This is Kiruna. We thought I would bring you back to Sweden, right? So Kiruna is a very interesting thing. It's the mines up in the north, but they have to move the city because the mine is going underneath the city and it's caving in the city, right? They need to mine parts of the city. So we had to move the whole city. So we made this urban plan where you come from the airport, you fly over the elk, right, running, or and then because this is protected land, right? And then you come into the city, and each station that you come off is a social center. So here you see that urban plan. Right down Main Street is the cable car, and all the activities you can do as you come off. And the city, we would extend it into the industrial land. All of this would be abandoned. But what's more interesting is that a process-based thing where that industrial land got slowly densified. And maybe the most important thing is to subdivide it into small lots. Because we don't believe anymore with big developers getting big chunks of the city. Developers are working for themselves. They decided in boardrooms. They don't really have the people in mind. It's all about a rate of return, and that's not good for the city. And what you guys don't know is that Tokyo was made exactly this way. Post-war, Tokyo was subdivided because they put a huge property tax on big chunks of property. Everyone was broke. Post-war, Tokyo was broke, so people had to subdivide it into little chunks, and you got thousands and millions of developers because everyone went up vertical and they changed the zoning. So that's how you change cities, and you make a lot of people get to participate.
You have, I know, all that you do, this work, is actually open source, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like a toolbox.
Yes.
And people can go onto your website and they can download plans and they can do whatever they want with it.
Yes, exactly. We only believe in open source. I only work with public entities. I only do public housing or public centers or as communities. That's all I'm interested in. Why? Because I saw my own country go up in flames.
So it's this bottom-up perspective,
yes,
that you do. We talk about it here as well, but we often find it's difficult to do. So it's like you need a structure for how do you start and what are the key points.
Well, it's not too difficult.
It's not easy.
It's easy if you want it. John Lennon said it. It's easy if you want it. Can you imagine they crucified a man who was singing about love and peace, right? What a kind of a threat is that? But so it's easy because when you go to a community guy and you go to a little neighborhood guy who's defending his rights, his place, his property, even if it's illegal or not, in Africa or South America, and he does something great like make a little social center, which that happens, like a Buena Vista social club. When these guys, you ask him, how did you do it? And he's taken thousands of kids off drugs. And he says, well, all we wanted to do was play dominoes. So we found a nice tree and we set up a pot of soup and we put a table on Sundays, and then it was Father's Day and then Mother's Day domino, and it went on and on and on, and a center was born. And everyone participated. It's all how much you want things to change.
So I know you worked here in Stockholm with the architect Johannes Torwart.
Yes,
and so you have a little bit of insight into our problems, like I mentioned, those million programs.
Yes.
What do you think of those, and what do you think is needed to transform them? Do you have an idea?
Yes, and I've been hearing that it takes millions to transform all those problems, those places that went up in flames in 2013 and this and that. And I tell you, it's not so difficult. It's just you have to go and penetrate. You have to sit there. You have to gain trust. What we don't have is trust. Why? Because the status quo has been so affected. Even if you think that I might be coming from a more radical point of view or for a left point, no, I just want good ideas to be implemented. It's Hayek, who's the economist, who's the philosopher behind free market economy, was one who believed that the city was overregulated. He talked about it in his books. And so what happens is Hayek thought that the market would regulate. The problem is if the status quo of the market is corrupt and is nationalistic and is arbitrary and is only self-interested in big corporations or in the 1%, then the status quo has to change. But if the status quo is public, is sharing, is open source, if the status quo is caring, is uniting diversity, if the status quo is right, the rest you can let it go, because that it will work.
Thank you so much, Alfredo Brillembourg.